to speak tonight. Northeastern has a really special place in my heart, especially over the past few years. I started here as a patient, and then a student of audiology, and as an adjunct professor over the past 8 years, and now speaking before you guys, so it's really a tremendous privilege, as I said, to be here. So the field of audiology is an important and rewarding one, and it's a field that has forever shaped my life as a person with hearing loss. 38 years ago, my sister was born, and that's really where my story starts. My sister was diagnosed with hearing loss in 1981, and that was the same year that I was born. My sister was just 3 years old, which is about the typical age of a child being diagnosed with hearing loss back then, because newborn hearing screenings weren't really routine or regulated by law as it is now. And so my sister was a really hyperactive child, and she was extremely frustrated as she did not have hearing to support her ability to learn language. And this caused her to act out, as she did not have that way to communicate with my parents and the world around her. So as I was born during this time, my parents were really concerned that I might have hearing loss myself. And now, having a sibling with hearing loss actually made me a high risk. So as students here, we learn about the high risk registry and flags to look for, just so that we can warrant a referral of a child for a hearing test. I was actually tested at 10 months, and during my testing, I provided very poor responses. I didn't do a good test at all. But my test was actually felt not to be valid, as the very next day, I had been diagnosed with ear infections. So I had another hearing test at 18 months of age, and at this time, my hearing was actually revealed to be within normal limits. It was said, though, that an accurate assessment of my hearing could not be made until measurements under earphones could be obtained. Because at that time, they were just presenting the signal to the speaker. So they really couldn't tell which ear was hearing if there was a difference. So they asked me to come back and have it under headphones. But that was not for another year. So come back in a year when he's a little older and we can do that test. My parents were essentially told that my hearing was normal, but come back in 1 year for that testing. And my parents did just that. And just so you guys know, my parents are in the back of the room, as well as my husband and my son. So my parents did just that. And they, at age 2 years and 4 months, they found my hearing again to be normal for both ears. Of course, this was great news for my parents. I had normal hearing. They had one child with hearing loss. Thankfully, I was escaped from that. However, at almost 3 years of age, I wasn't really talking as I should have been. I was recommended for a speech evaluation due to those concerns about my language development. And as I was not talking as expected, however, during the speech evaluation, my attention was really bad. I could not be trained for any of the testing, nor could a receptive age be established for me, because I couldn't be trained for the testing. This was thought just to be the fact that, I had an older sister that talked a lot for me, and maybe I was infantilized, maybe I was just babied a lot, and everybody just took care of me, and I had no reason to need to speak. So, because of that, I had yet another hearing test at 3.5 years of old, just to really make certain that my hearing was normal. My results came back with a caveat that my attention span was extremely limited and not reliable. However, this was fine. Despite all of my variability in having poor testing, I showed hearing within normal limits bilaterally. So, I'm sure all the third-year students are kind of grinning and grimacing at what I'm saying, because it does go on to a little bit more interesting details. So, with having normal hearing, my parents took me to speech therapy for 17 times over 3 months when I was 4 years old. It was reported that I could not consistently produce sound, and I demonstrated significant deficits in my hearing, in my language, not my hearing, and was not developing as expected for my age. They reported that maybe my auditory comprehension skills were markedly reduced and of significant concern. My mother again expressed her concerns, and she was again encouraged to pursue a complete evaluation, but this time a neurological assessment. So, shortly after, at age 4, my mother took me for an intellectual and neurological exam. It was reported that I was not able to identify any of the 7 body parts asked of me, and most kids at that age should be able to identify at least 4 or 5. I was not able to understand any of the directions given to me, and the examiner felt that I could not perform because of my inability to understand the instructions. My mother was not satisfied with this clinic's finding, especially after she was assured that my hearing was normal. And she was then told, well, it could be an auditory processing disorder. She had had enough of all of this and decided to seek a second opinion. She made an appointment for an evaluation at Children's Hospital and had the unfortunate experience of being referred to an intern, and his findings concluded with a referral to a clinic for the mentally retarded, which is now, I know, not a politically correct term, but that's how they referred to it back in the day. My mother was horrified at being told that, but she knew absolutely without a doubt that I was extremely bright. She wanted to say, and I didn't put this in here, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Are you recording this for Stacy? Yes. You might want to pause it. But she said that because she had another child to compare me to, that I was even as bright as my sister. And so she confirmed this with my sister's speech therapist, Jean McCarthy. Because again, my sister had hearing loss and was undergoing the strategy to help her develop language. And she was working with me on her own at that time. And Jean referred us to a psychologist at Children's Hospital who very quickly determined that there was actually nothing psychologically wrong with me. And she wanted another hearing test. And so she brought me down to audiology that day. And within minutes of my having that test, my mom was told that I had a hearing loss even worse than my sister's. She was relieved, my parents were relieved, because she knew how to handle hearing loss, and having dealt with this with my sister. And some of you may know this, but that very audiologist that correctly diagnosed me for the very first time ever was Dr. Sandy Cleveland. And if you don't know who Sandy Cleveland is, she's the graduate director of this program of audiology. And she's a professor here as well. And back then, she was just an audiologist at Children's. So my life forever would change when I met Sandy on February 26, 1986. My initial hearing test with Sandy, done just 1 month after my previous hearing test that showed normal hearing, showed that I actually had a moderately severe hearing loss. Over the next 2 weeks, Sandy did everything in her power to really try to find out what my true hearing loss was. Sandy wrote in her report that my reliability was great and that I had much fewer false positives, which meant I wasn't trying to guess to be right at the test. And that this was probably due to the fact that we weren't searching well below threshold and for where I would hear. I could actually truly hear the test and finally understand after 4 years, 5 years, what to do. And with hearing aids, I did so much better. I was medically cleared to wear hearing aids just 10 days later after being diagnosed, and just 3 months prior to my 5th birthday. Sandy later told me that the pediatrician of the program, the preschool function, so I was part of a program that tried to help give me assistance, and the pediatrician of that program called Sandy and personally thanked her and told her that she saved my life. Because if I had gone down this route of being mentally retarded, the services would have been completely different for me. I wouldn't have had appropriate amplification to help me learn to talk. Because the hearing loss that I had alone would not have supported language. So, the fight was hardly over at that point though. I was just now being diagnosed with hearing loss, first fit with hearing aids. I now needed to learn language, and I now had to enter school for the first time. The school district didn't actually know how to handle a student like me, nor did they know what services I needed. So the town's solution was to put me in special education full time. Well, by now you probably know that my mother doesn't take much for an answer. So my parents knew that this was not going to be the path for me. I did not have a learning disability. I just needed assistance to maximize my hearing so I could access the classroom. My mother actually has a photo in the front page of our paper because she had to fight the town school board to allow me to be mainstreamed with support services. My parents are truly my biggest advocates. I can remember my mother telling me that my hearing loss would never stop me. And if I didn't want to do something, I could never say it was because of my hearing. I had to come up with a completely different excuse if I wanted to get out of something. Because, for right or wrong, she raised me that my hearing loss was just like wearing glasses. I could do whatever I wanted. I was mainstreamed in classes, and I knew that I was different. I was awkward around other kids because I just spent 5 years not hearing, not knowing how to socialize. And I was extremely clingy to my mother, and I was a true mama's boy. I remember being in 6th grade having to wear an FM system. So for those of you who don't know what an FM is, it's where the teacher wears a microphone and it wirelessly sends a signal to my ear. But back then, I used to have to take my nice hearing aids that I liked and have to go to school and put these big clunky hearing aids on with an antenna that I could pull out. So me being a kid already feel even more awkward, wicked embarrassed. So I felt like an alien, I just felt different. And middle school was tough, you know, we're in an age where bullying is really being taken seriously. I used to be called Helen Keller walking down the hall just because I wore glasses and hearing aids. It wasn't until high school that I actually met a great group of friends where I truly finally felt like I fit in. However, my hearing loss is progressive though. And in July of 1998, I'm now 17 years old and my hearing shifted again. Sandy knows the story I'm about to tell. I can remember this weekend so clearly. Sandy saw me on a Friday afternoon, and the night before my family had taken me to a Whitney Houston concert. And when I went to testing that Friday, my hearing had shifted, and I was devastated. But Sandy thought, well, maybe it's possible that it's just a temporary threshold shift in hearing because of the loud noise at the concert. So Sandy did something that's highly unheard of. She opened the clinic on a Sunday and saw me 2 days later just to check my hearing. And you know, my hearing was down, it was permanent, and this was the first time I had to really deal with the ramifications of hearing loss. Before, it was just status quo, it was what I had to deal with. But with the change in hearing, it also meant that I had to consider possibly going to a different school, wearing different hearing aids, possibly learning sign language. But what I remember too the most is that this is when I realized how much my parents, I can't look over at the table, how much my parents really were so invested in me. And that weekend before we saw Sandy, it was a really rainy weekend, and I can remember this like yesterday. I was really upset, and I was sitting on the sofa in our living room looking out the window, and my mom came, and my mom and I have this weird relationship where I can't see her cry and she can't see me cry, and she came and sat with me and cried. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad move, and I don't know why I got up, because my dad went into the bathroom and he closed the door, and I opened the bathroom door, and it was the first time I ever saw my dad cry. And I remember just feeling so much, because he was supposed to be the strong one, right? And he was. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I needed him to be strong for me, and he absolutely is. But now being a father, I know how much you struggle to want to be able to take away the hurt of your children and feeling so completely powerless from that. You know, and I just remember feeling so many feelings at that time, you know, anger, being like my whole life was out of my control, just having a heavy heart. And, you know, I can only imagine how powerless he must have felt and wanting to be able to fix everything that ever upset me, but not having the power to be able to do that. And while my hearing loss did worsen and my hearing aids did change, I decided to stay in the same school with my group of friends because I finally fit in, and that mattered more to me. And I wanted to keep that. And I had great services thanks to my parents who developed a really nice, wonderful IEP plan for me. You know, and I was very fortunate. I graduated in the top of my class from high school, and I was one of the top students. And I went to Holy Cross in Worcester, and I loved every minute of it. However, in 2002, hearing loss would rear its ugly head again. And this time it wasn't just a decrease in hearing. It also meant that I couldn't understand words. And I remember being home on break, and I was watching TV in the living room, and my mother was sitting on the couch across from me. And she got up and she hit me, like an Italian mother, not like me. Like, what are you doing ignoring me? She goes, I just called your name 3 times. And that's when I realized something had changed. I couldn't recognize that her words actually had any meaning anymore. It was just noise. And so, because of that, I went to a different audiologist because Sandy had left at that time. And I remember being told that, yes, my hearing had changed, but there was nothing more my hearing aid could do at that point. They couldn't just tweak it or program it or up it. My hearing loss was too bad at that time. Even the most powerful hearing aid would never help me. And that it was time to consider a cochlear implant. And in that report, it was stated that I had a long-standing hearing loss and that pursuing a cochlear implant was a possible option for me. But also another option worth considering was maybe learning American Sign Language. And I remember my mind was blown. Here I am, a junior in college, my whole life ahead of me, and being told that either I go through this surgery or I have to leave the oral world. I wouldn't be able to communicate with all of you and possibly learn sign language. And the irony is that I remember very clearly, you just remember a snapshot that I met this doctor and he told me that my hearing was going to always be too good and that I would never be a cochlear implant candidate. So whatever crystal ball that he had that day clearly malfunctioned. And so here I am as a junior in college, having my whole life ahead of me, and now I had this hurdle I had to overcome. I decided to move forward with having my first cochlear implant in May of 2003. I wanted to be able to hear. I still wanted to communicate as I always had. You know, while I believe in the deaf community and the wonderful language that they have, it just wasn't the community I grew up in. And at Holy Cross, I had to advocate for myself now. My mother and father had taught me well. I was able to get cart for my classes so that I had somebody that captioned everything that I said, everything that they said. They gave me an FM system. They even gave me an oral interpreter that stood in front of me and mouthed everything that was being said, so that if I missed it, I had a second person to speak it back to me. And as a part of getting a cochlear implant, you really need to do some practice with it, because it doesn't use any part of a natural hearing system like a hearing aid does. It's a surgically implanted device. I hear through electric stimulation. I'm not using the same natural auditory pathway that I make the assumption that you are all using now. And so because of this, they really recommended that I have auditory training, that I train my ear to hear words again through the cochlear implant. But at that time, years ago, we were talking about needing to commit to 6 months of training. Well, I was only home for 2 months on break. And so my audiologist at that time put a listserv out in the community boards and asked if there was anybody in the community willing to do auditory training. And that was actually Dr. Sandy Cleveland that stepped up and emailed and said, hey, I would love to work with Mark again. And Sandy, I don't know how she went through it because I was tough on her. I remember being so mad doing this that I called her on the Mass Pike from the phone because I was running late, and I was like, are you happy, Sandy? I'm calling you from my phone on my implant ear. Do you remember that?
I remember that, Mark.
Probably wasn't a conversation to forget. She would take me to Wallaston, which is a supermarket on campus, and she would literally have conversations with me standing in front of the cooler where the Coke bottles were and stuff, and we would just be chatting. So that's how I became a patient at Northeastern. But getting a cochlear implant was one of the best things I've ever done for myself. The results were amazingly incredible, and my hearing was even better than I could ever have imagined. I graduated from Holy Cross in 2004 with a degree in psychology and a minor in American Sign Language and Deaf Studies. So I did learn American Sign Language. And I ended up taking a year off, and I did research in psych at Brown University before applying to grad school right here at Northeastern to become an audiologist in 2005. I went on to specialize in cochlear implants during my 4th year externship, which is what all the 3rd years are about to embark on. Upon my graduation in 2009, I began a career at Mass Eye working with the cochlear implant program. I also began teaching a course at Northeastern in 2009, and I have been teaching 1 to 2 courses a year ever since here. And while working at Mass Eye it really was the catalyst of getting my 2nd implant. Mass Eye is a very fast-paced environment, and I remember having to be on the phone a lot with my cochlear implant. And then there's a community, I wouldn't call it a community room, Mark knows what I'm talking about, the hearing aid lab, and we all would congregate in there. And but people would ask my opinion of audiograms and patients that they were in, and I'd be on hold with my good ear on the phone, so I'd be like, all right, hold on, I have to put it on speakerphone, take the telecoil off, because I couldn't rely on my hearing aid alone. My hearing aid was only giving me about 30% word understanding. And I realized, you know, if I'm going to make a living, a career out of helping people hear, that I needed to be able to hear the best I could in both ears. So I actually did get my 2nd implant while I was working at Mass Eye by a surgeon on staff there, and I was activated 12 days later in between patients, and that was quite fun. The note in here, that's why I should stick to my notes. My mother was not amused because I actually chose to get my implant done on April Fool's Day, and my mother is kind of superstitious and did not take that as a good sign, but all went well. So, in December of 2011, a job opportunity opened for me to work with Cochlear, the manufacturer of my implants. And it has been an absolute dream job, because I actually get to work with the very people that are getting implanted with this technology. That has actually absolutely changed my life. I have seen so many activations and every single one of them chokes up, still gets me to choke up. And today I actually got to see a 14-year-old boy be bilaterally, simultaneously activated today. And it was incredible to watch him choke up as he heard his own voice for the first time, and just to watch his parents, because you can see the relief on their face, that this leap of faith of going through a cochlear implant surgery paid off, and he could hear now. You know, and I have a 4-year-old son back there trying to be as quiet as possible. And you know, I can't imagine what it'd be like to not hear his sweet little voice. Remember that technology that I told you about where I had to wear those big antennas to pull out? Well, now there's actually a little wireless microphone on that table streaming right to the very technology that I have right now, so I can pick them up without looking any different than I already, with just the technology that I have. I actually think having the cochlear implant with the wireless technology has truly changed my life, because I was doing great, but Orion's got such a little... Orion, say hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so that's what I gotta hear. So I put the microphone on him in the car seat, and we live off of a busy road, so when I take him to the park in the carriage, I can put the microphone on him in the carriage and hear him. When he's at the park and he's running far away, all across the slides and everything, and Orion, you always tell me you don't need the mic, right? Yeah, but who needs it? Is Daddy hearing?
No.
Yeah. So anyhow, I think one of the sweetest moments, though, that I have to share. The story is not in here, but we took Orion to a Red Sox game, and Orion had a cold, and he was kind of feeling groggy. And I put the microphone on him, and it was incredible because he fell asleep, and I actually could hear his breathing change, and it was just amazing. Because think about it. I'm this kid that was diagnosed with mental retardation at age 5, and now I'm able to hear this sweet little voice because of this technology that I have. And so while my initial start for my family was a bit rocky until I met Sandy, I must say that the field of audiology has done so much for me, and that I'm so honored to be able to be part of this community and give back and to be able to pay it forward. And I want to close on one last note. And this is a quote from the same report that said I had a neurocognitive disorder. No phrase or terminology will ever adequately define Mark, but Mark will determine in his own way a path toward fulfillment of his potential, and his parents will provide him every opportunity of this. And I don't share this quote to toot my own horn, but I share it because I couldn't have become who I am today without people like my parents, my husband, my son, Sandy, and all the wonderful audiologists in the community that I've gotten to grow up with and work with now. And so, all of you parents out here and family, you should be so proud of your children because they're entering into a field in which they will be able to tremendously help people like myself. So, thank you.